So I'm with Rob Hirschfeld, and Rob is with RackN, his company. Tell us a little bit about RackN.
So RackN does hybrid infrastructure. So what we do is we automate cloud and physical infrastructures, basically make it so you don't care about your infrastructure, and then allow people to run Kubernetes or Mesos or Docker, Swarm on those infrastructures, whether it's in their own data center, whether it's on the cloud, or whether it's clouds in their own data center. It really is about making it not matter.
Okay, and so you go to a lot of these conferences. You know, you were very involved in the OpenStack community. You've come to know the Docker ecosystem pretty well, and there's a lot of discussion now about the state of these ecosystems. I mean, you're very involved in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and you are, in a sense, representing operators, right?
That's been my goal in Kubernetes. So in Kubernetes, I co-chair the SIG, what we call SIG cluster ops. So it's how do you operate Kubernetes and make it a platform from the bottom up, or zero decay problem.
So when you look at OpenStack, and you look at Kubernetes, and you look at Docker, what are the forces you are starting to see really at play?
So it's really about developers. I mean, fundamentally, it's how do we get developers more productive, and it's always been about that. But how do we make it so that they spend less time dealing with the nuances of application, of operating the dependency graphs, clustering, scaling, right? We're still looking for this magic bullet in just taking more things off developers' plates, because the more that time they spend doing ops, the less time they spend building new features.
So what's going on though inside these ecosystems now? There's a lot of kind of issues we see between the Kubernetes ecosystem and the Docker ecosystem, right? What's your take on that?
The challenges between them?
Yeah.
So they're really trying to do some very similar things. And I think at DockerCon, with the Docker Swarm integrations into Docker, we saw a real acknowledgement that Kubernetes patterns and practices were on the right track. Very simple, scale, right? Being able to scale things up. A lot of times it was like Cloud Foundry. I felt like I was watching a Cloud Foundry demo from 2 years ago. And what we're really seeing is we're trying to find the patterns and practices that allow people to create distributed applications more easily. And that was what I see with this. Kubernetes had a leadership position because Google's experience. Docker had a great packaging story. That's where they came from, developer work experience. And we're seeing, I'm thinking about Adrian Cockcroft right now, this convergence of features as people say, wow, that's a good way to do it, and we replicate each other's work. And I think that's a lot of what we see today.
So what's your take on the Docker news today? As far as the context of the container ecosystem and like these forces around Kubernetes and others.
So I still think we have a long way to go.
What do you mean by that?
So I like that Docker is trying to make it simpler to create clusters and scale clusters, right? My company uses Compose and Docker, and we do microservices architecture, so we're real leaderships, not just in helping install Kubernetes, but actually using that type of infrastructure. And I think that they did a nice job showing that we're starting to make it easier, but I don't think that's really all the way true. I think that there's significant challenges in really building applications that scale like that do that type of work, that can leverage these tools. It's good to put it in the hands of somebody so they can break things faster, right? Oh, I tried to scale to 10 nodes and it fell apart. That's a really good thing to be able to do easily, instead of spending weeks doing this 10 node scale and then it falling apart and having to replicate it over and over and over again. But my feeling was there's a lot going on behind the curtains that we haven't figured out and simplified yet. And so I'm scared I'm putting on my operational hat, I'm scared we're just glossing over this again. That we're papering over all right, operating this stuff is actually hard, and you have to think about things, and you have to understand opening up a port. Yay, I can open up a port from a command line. Is that a good idea? I don't know. And we also paper over security. Oh, I just instantly brought up my cluster and now it is all secure. Well, maybe not. You actually have to understand how security works to make sure that you have a trusted relationship between components and you can manage it. So I think there's a lot of pieces that we're still wishing away that aren't really gone.
How about the Docker, the Docker announcements and what they reflect about, you know, Docker's own protection of its own, platforms and and how that plays out with the rest of the companies that are squarely centered around the Docker technology. All the companies here.
So this is one of those things, I've posted about this in the past, it really is a dilemma because Docker wants to move quickly, they want to own the brand, they want to be part of this, and they also love having a very vibrant ecosystem, right? We're standing in the middle of the show floor with a lot of vendors coming in to play in this sandbox. And so I think there really is a tension between Docker advancing it. If you listen very carefully to the keynotes, Docker presents it as we did this, which wasn't a community we in my ears, it was a Docker we. And so I think there really is a tension between what Docker perceives its users want, which is a company that delivers this and is a strong advocate for them, and a control plane, right? That helps users in a lot of ways. And then the ecosystem around it, where vendors want to be able to say, well, we're going to use these tools and we really want to be a part of it. And I think it's very problematic when one vendor has a very strong voice and is cannibalizing its ecosystem. We were talking about VMware and Amazon doing that, but I think they did it much more slowly. That Docker is like moving super fast. Sorry about snapping in the mic, but they're moving super fast, and we've got this challenge of letting the ecosystem stabilize before the dominant vendor comes in.
Well, Rob, thanks so much for taking some time, and I know you've always been thinking about the operator, and I think that's kind of at the heart of a lot of the issues here. It's like the operator has not been represented in the past, and that's always something to be thinking about.
It's a really important market for people, and it's sort of a forgotten, it's the plumbers. I like to think of them as, us as the plumbers of the internet. And it's one of those challenging where people really don't understand how much work it is to do it, and so they just skip past it. So I appreciate the comments, thank you.
Great, thank you, Rob.